when the dead child's skin began peeling under his fingers, exposing blackened muscles that instantly crumbled to ash, geologist Belomestnov understood. This village lived by laws written in no textbook. The body, which had seemed whole just seconds ago, was turning into a handful of coal dust right in his hands, as if an invisible boundary between the forest and the abandoned houses separated two worlds with different flows of time. But it all started differently, far more ordinary. In the summer of 1962, a geological survey party was conducting explorations in the Oka River Basin, a tributary of the Angara cutting through the eastern spurs of the Sion Mountains. A cascade of hydroelectric stations was being planned, and therefore every ravine, every valley of this uninhabited land needed thorough study. The taiga here was dense, pristine, the terrain difficult. A good 120 versts to the nearest settlement along animal trails. Assistant geologist Gleb Semyonovich Belomestnov, an experienced man not prone to fantasies, separated from the party to reconnoiter an unnamed tributary. His compass led.
This tributary had no name, appeared as a dotted line on maps, and the Oka River itself, here in the upper reaches, was no wider than 15 sajans. The small village sat on a terrace, protected from northern winds by a rocky outcrop, a place chosen wisely with good sense. Just 16 homesteads arranged in 2 rows along the single street leading to the forest edge. The buildings were solid, log cabins of thick larch, plank roofs, though some needed repair. Belomestnov estimated the structures at about 50 years old, maybe a bit more, judging by the settling of the logs and the wood's color. There were no signs of recent human presence, no smoke from chimneys, no beaten paths, no tracks in the damp earth after yesterday's rain. The silence was absolute, undisturbed by bird song or the rustle of animals in the undergrowth. This silence was unnatural for the taiga, where life teems in every square arshin. Belomestnov froze at the clearing's edge, listening, and only the sound of water in the river and his own breathing broke the quiet. But curiosity overcame caution, and he moved toward the nearest cabin.
The first thing that struck him, the absence of smells. In such places you usually smell smoke, manure, sourdough, human habitation. Here, the air was virginally clean, as if the village had stood uninhabited since its founding. No dog barking, no cow lowing, no chicken clucking, nothing. Even mosquitoes didn't buzz, though it was the height of July, and in ordinary taiga, the gnats turn life into torture. There were vegetable gardens, visible by the remains of pole fences, but overgrown with burdock and couch grass so completely that rows were barely discernible. Belomestnov looked into the first cabin. The door wasn't locked, just closed with a wooden latch. Inside reigned an almost museum-like order, benches along the walls, a table in the middle, kitchen utensils on shelves. Everything cleaned, washed, arranged with care, but covered in dust. Not a thick layer, but enough to understand no one had lived here for a long time. There were almost no provisions.
The second cabin was arranged similarly to the first, and the third and the fourth, as if built from one template. The furniture was simple but sturdy, without excess. Almost no clothing remained. Only in one house did he find a linen shirt on a nail and worn felt boots. Similar volumes appeared in every dwelling, and Belomestnov, leafing through some, discovered texts in German, French, and English, though Russian ones were also present. Strange subject matter for a Siberian village: philosophy, theosophy, works by Blavatsky and Steiner, writings of Vivekananda. In one cabin he found a volume of Tolstoy, but not fiction, religious and philosophical articles. The impression formed that educated people had lived here, far removed from peasant life, though the furnishings were deliberately ascetic. In the stoves, no ash, no coals. Either they'd been carefully cleaned before departure or hadn't been heated for many years. Belomestnov examined 8 cabins and found nowhere in any icons, crosses, or other signs of orthodoxy. Instead, in several houses, strange symbols hung on the walls, drawn in ink on canvas, geometric figures, circles with inscribed triangles, 5-pointed stars. At the far end of the village, almost at the forest's edge, stood a barn, a sturdy, massive structure with a door on iron hinges. The door was locked from inside, but the lock was simple, a wooden latch, and Belomestnov managed to slip his hand through the gap and move it. Inside reigned semi-darkness. The smell was strange, not rot, not mustiness, but something spicy, distantly resembling frankincense or sandalwood. When his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw them. People lay in rows on wooden platforms, 58 if he counted correctly, old people and children, men and women, dressed in simple linen garments. Their faces were calm, hands folded on their chests, poses natural, as if they'd fallen asleep and never woken. No signs of violence, wounds, blood, nothing. Belomestnov approached the nearest body, an elderly man with a long gray beard. He carefully touched the hand. The skin was cool, but not cold, firm, almost waxy. There was no decomposition whatsoever, though judging by the dust, the bodies had lain here for years, if not decades.
In one of the central cabins, the most spacious one, a wooden casket decorated with carvings stood on the table. Belomestnov opened it and found a bundle of notebooks filled with small, careful handwriting, old orthography, pre-revolutionary with hard signs at word endings, with yachts and fetus. The ink hadn't faded. The paper was excellently preserved, though the edges of sheets had slightly yellowed. The first notebook opened with a date, St. Petersburg, February 1917. Then came text titled Chronicle of the Community of New Light. Belomestnov sat on the bench and began reading. The story proved unusual and, if the records were to be believed, genuine. In February 1917, shortly before the empire's collapse, a community of like-minded people formed in the capital, professing a special mystical teaching. The members included representatives of different classes: a gymnasium teacher, a surgeon, a retired colonel, a railway engineer, an artist, a master furniture maker, a homeowner. 17 people in total, later joined by 8 more. Their teaching represented a fusion of Russian cosmist ideas, Blavatsky's theosophy, Gurdjieff's practices, and mystical revelations of the Rosicrucians.
The goal the community members set for themselves was ambitious: raising the new human, free from the vices of modern civilization. They believed humans possessed hidden spiritual abilities that had atrophied under conditions of urban life and capitalist exploitation. These abilities, by their conviction, could be developed through meditation, asceticism, and special self-improvement practices. In March 1918, when the Bolsheviks finally consolidated power, the community decided to leave the capital. They liquidated their property, pooled resources, and secretly, in small groups, departed for eastern Siberia. The journey was long, first by railway to Irkutsk, then by water up the Angara, and the last 280 versts on foot and horseback. By autumn 1918, all had reached the chosen place, a remote ravine in the Cyan foothills. The first 2 years went to settlement, building cabins, clearing land for gardens, stockpiling firewood. The community lived isolated, maintaining no contact with the outside world. By 1920, the village was ready to receive a new life.
Life in the community was built on principles of voluntary simplicity and mutual aid. They ate plant food and fish from the river, consumed no meat, though no formal prohibitions existed, Simply each person's inner convictions inclined toward abstinence. Everyone taught each other crafts and sciences, and after several years, each possessed basics of carpentry, smithing, tailoring, could read in 3 languages. The absence of need for commodity production, freedom from state and economic exploitation, freed enormous amounts of time. The community devoted this time to the main thing, spiritual practices. Daily after lunch, everyone gathered in a specially designated cabin and meditated for 2 to 3 hours. They practiced various techniques, from simple breath observation to complex visualizations. The goal was penetration into what they called the manifest world, a parallel space accessible only to developed consciousness. The first year's successes were modest, only vague visions that could be attributed to self-suggestion. But gradually, as practices deepened, phenomena became more distinct. Some began reporting encounters with entities, journeys in space without bodily movement. By 1928, after 10 years of life in seclusion, 4 from the community acquired the ability to confidently enter the manifest world. They described it as a space similar to the earthly one but more fluid, changeable, inhabited by other beings. Remarkably, all 4 described what they saw similarly, which ruled out the hallucination hypothesis. Moreover, they discovered that in the manifest world, they could communicate with people physically located thousands of versts away. Thus, contact was established with communities in the Altai, the Pamir foothills, and the Urals, all practicing similar techniques. Through the manifest world, they learned of events in the outside world, about collectivization, repressions, the World War. But the outside world interested them less and less. The manifest world opened such prospects that earthly life seemed merely a larval stage. There, in the manifest world, they encountered entities of different developmental levels, some benevolent toward humans, others indifferent, still others openly hostile. Gradually, it became clear that people's mental power increased many times over during joint meditation. By uniting, they could penetrate layers of the manifest world inaccessible to an individual. And one day, in 1934, there, in the manifest world, they met one whom they called the Teacher.
The teacher wasn't human, or rather, had been long ago, but had already crossed the boundary and become a permanent inhabitant of the manifest world. He explained to the community that they'd reached a certain stage of development and could now take the next step, relocate to the manifest world permanently. This would open new horizons, the possibility of unimpeded communication with all fellow seekers on Earth, penetration into other worlds existing in parallel. But there was a condition. Everyone must relocate at once because collective energy was needed to maintain the portal. If even one remained unable, the rest would be pulled back and the attempt would fail. The community decided to wait. Improvement accelerated. If in the 30s every 5th person acquired the ability, by the 40s already every 2nd. The new generation born in the village mastered practices more easily than adults. By 1950, only 3 elderly people still couldn't enter the manifest world. They waited for their deaths, but the community showed remarkable longevity. No one died before 82. The last unable person, the community's elder, died in October 1960 at age 96. The path was open. On October 17, 1960, according to the last entry in the Chronicle, all village inhabitants prepared for the transition.
Belomesnov read the manuscript for 3 days. The fact was that the party he worked with had suffered a tragedy. 3 seasonal workers, former prisoners, attacked the chief and Belomesnov himself. In the shootout, 2 attackers were killed, the 3rd fled into the taiga. But the chief of the party also received a fatal wound. Belomesnov, lightly wounded in the shoulder, was walking back to base camp when he stumbled upon the village. While reading the Chronicle, his wound healed, and he ate dried mushrooms and cedar nuts from the stores. Raised in the spirit of vulgar materialism, Belomesnov received the described events with doubt. The manifest world seemed to him a hallucination, spawned by malnutrition, isolation, and possibly consumption of some psychotropic herbs mentioned in passing in the records. But the feeling of grace pervading the entire village, especially in the barn, gave him no peace. On the fourth day, he decided to test the main hypothesis. What if the people hadn't died, but were in a lethargic sleep? Maybe the barn was saturated with substances that slowed metabolism. He entered the barn, chose one of the lighter bodies, a child about 10 years old, and carefully carried it out in his arms.
Belomesnov laid the remains under a larch and recoiled in horror. The child's skin visibly darkened, becoming gray, then black. He touched the cheek. The skin peeled under his fingers, exposing muscles that immediately turned to dust. The process went swiftly, as if time, stopped for decades, crashed down all at once. In a minute, only the skeleton, covered with scraps of blackened skin, remained of the dead boy, and in another minute, a handful of ash and bone fragments. The smell of decomposition was so intense that Belomesnov doubled over from nausea. Now, no doubt remained, the people were dead and had been dead for a long time. But something maintained their shells intact while they remained in the village. Some force, invisible and incomprehensible, acted here contrary to the laws of nature. Belomesnov fled the place in panic, running without looking back. 2 weeks later, he reached base camp and told no one about the discovery. The investigation into the workers' attack dragged on for months, and he had no time for the village. And what could he say? Who would believe this story? Plans for building the hydroelectric station on the Oka were soon deemed economically unfeasible. Explorations were curtailed, and the region returned to its pristine state. On September 14, 2000, 3 men landed on the shore of the unnamed tributary of the Oka River. The eldest, Gleb Semyonovich Belomesnov, now a professor in the geophysics department at Irkutsk University, 60 years old, gray-haired but robust. The middle one, Viktor Andreevich Holmogorov, 38 years old, experimental physicist, specialist in anomalous phenomena. The youngest, Oleg Yurievich Terentiev, 33 years old, biologist and physician, passionate about parapsychology. All 3 had known each other long, united by interest in the unexplained. Belomesnov told them about the village only in 1998, when he felt the end was near and the secret might leave with him. They spent 2 years preparing for the expedition, gathering equipment, studying archives, trying to find any mention of the village. They found nothing. They set out as 3, without publicity, registering the expedition as a tourist hike. With them, they brought a portable weather station, dosimeters, electroencephalograph, electrocardiograph, all-wave radio receiver, cameras, video camera, and food supplies for 3 weeks. They did first thing, Kolmorogov deployed instruments and began measurements. Something astonishing was discovered. On the village territory, radiation background was practically absent. Dosimeter readings didn't exceed 2-3 micro-roentgens per hour, below the instrument's sensitivity. One only had to walk to the clearing's edge. The device came alive and showed 87 micro-roentgens per hour. This was significantly above the natural background for these latitudes, around 52 degrees north, where 30-35 micro-roentgens is considered normal. Kolmorogov conducted a series of measurements around the perimeter. It turned out the village was surrounded by a belt of elevated radiation about 1 kilometer wide, with the maximum at the village boundary. As distance increased, radiation decreased, and at 850 meters returned to background values. There was no wildlife on the village territory, no birds, rodents, or insects, though September was warm. But the river half a kilometer away teemed with fish. That evening, over dinner, they turned on the radio. On all bands, only crackling was heard, white noise. But on long waves, at 108 kHz frequency, the noise had periodicity. It intensified, then faded with a period of exactly 23 minutes. Kolmorogov recorded the phenomenon on a dictaphone for further analysis.
The next day, September 15th, the group entered the barn. Bodies lay in their former places, in the same poses. Belovsnov recognized the old man he'd touched 38 years ago. The sandalwood smell was still the same, light and pleasant, though there was no sandalwood in the barn. Terentiev began measurements. The old man's body temperature was 22.3 degrees Celsius at an air temperature of 20.5 degrees, a difference of 1.8 degrees. This meant the bodies were radiating heat, though minimal. The portable electroencephalograph recorded weak but discernible oscillations, signs of brain activity, though amplitude was negligible. The electrocardiograph showed a strange picture. A single spike appeared on the film resembling a cardiac impulse with a periodicity of exactly 23 minutes, the same periodicity as the radio noise. Terentiev took tissue samples, placing them in preservative solution, as well as air samples in hermetic containers. All three noted a strange state. After an hour in the barn, light anxiety began, then transitioned to tranquility. Measuring their own indicators, they discovered body temperature had dropped to 33.8 degrees, pulse had slowed to 46 to 52 beats per minute, pressure had decreased to 95/60. The condition resembled mild intoxication.
They immediately took a Lutheracoccus tincture and went beyond the village boundaries, where they walked the surroundings for about an hour until indicators returned to normal. With nightfall, they organized a watch. Each for 3 hours observed the village from a rise 250 meters from the barn. Night fell on the taiga densely, soundlessly, as if the world held its breath, awaiting something. At 0018 Irkutsk time, 1718 Greenwich, Terentiev noticed a faint glow above the barn. It appeared suddenly, without warning, and had the shape of an elongated egg positioned vertically. The object's size, about 2.5 meters in height, 1.5 meters in diameter. The glow was silvery white, semi-transparent. Stars showed through it. The object hung motionless at about 5 meters above the barn's ridge. Terentiev woke the others. All observed through binoculars. An attempt to film with the video camera failed. The object didn't appear on film, only a vague spot. After 47 minutes, the glow began to dim and disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. At the moment of disappearance, a chill ran down each person's spine, as if something invisible touched their consciousness. All three had disturbing dreams that night, images of volcanoes, lava flows, some large creatures resembling slugs. The plots were clear at the moment of waking, but as soon as they reached for a pencil to record them, details slipped away, leaving only vague unease.
On the 16th of September, they conducted house examinations. In the stove of one cabin, they found a hiding place. Under a stone lay a leather pouch with several notebooks and a gold medallion on a chain. The notebooks were filled with strange symbols, resembling Egyptian hieroglyphics or Tibetan writing, but neither. A cipher, probably developed by the community itself. The medallion was heavy, judging by weight, fine gold. On one side depicted an eye in a triangle, on the other a rose and cross, the chain of the same metal. With dusk's approach, a barely perceptible tension appeared in the air, as if invisible forces were preparing for something. The second night, the luminous object appeared again, but now the glow was denser, more opaque. It hung over the barn from 003 to 126. That is 36 minutes longer than the previous appearance. Radio interference intensified. Noise became louder. By morning, all three had headaches. Body temperature dropped to 34.2 degrees, though they hadn't entered the barn. Dreams repeated, and all three dreamed something similar. A
a crater, lava, huge, slow creatures. Waking, Kolmogorov said with difficulty, "They're trying to talk to us." Terentiev proposed a hypothesis that the object above the barn exerted influence at a distance, possibly through infrasound or unknown radiation. They decided to stay farther from the village the third night, at a distance of at least half a kilometer.
On the 17th of September after lunch, instruments began behaving strangely. The dosimeter showed jumping values, now 15, now 120 microroentgens. The needle darted. The radio receiver choked with interference on all frequencies. The compass refused to show north. The needle slowly rotated in a circle. Kolmogorov measured the magnetic field. The intensity was 3 times higher than normal and continued to grow. By evening, it became clear a powerful magnetic storm was approaching. But magnetic storms are usually connected with solar activity, and weather reports predicted nothing unusual. At 21:35, a glow appeared on the northern horizon, pale green, shimmering. Aurora borealis, but at the 52nd degree of north latitude, this is the rarest anomaly. The aurora intensified. Bands of light danced across the sky, colored red and violet. The sky blazed as if on the eve of the end of the world. Kolmogorov muttered, "Magnetic storm class G5. The strongest category happens once every 20 years." By midnight, the familiar object appeared above the barn, but now it glowed blindingly bright, not silvery, but white light with a blue tint. In size, it was larger, about 4 meters in height.
All 3 were at a safe distance, by the river, but even from there the object seemed unbearably bright. Terentiev managed to measure physiological indicators. Body temperature in all 3 dropped to 32.1 degrees. Pulse slowed to 38 beats per minute, pressure 85/50. Kolmogorov said hoarsely, "We need to go farther." But their legs wouldn't obey. The aurora reached the zenith. The entire sky blazed with red-green fire. Stars disappeared. The object above the barn pulsated in rhythm with the radio noise. Every 23 minutes, brightness increased to unbearable. Belomestnov felt consciousness slipping. Circles swam before his eyes. The last thing he remembered, Kolmogorov falling to his knees and his own scream, "Run!" Then blackout. Terentiev came to first. It was the beginning of 11 in the morning. He lay on the riverbank, 20 meters from the tents. Nearby lay unconscious Belomestnov and Kolmogorov. His head was splitting. There was a metallic taste in his mouth. Nausea was merciless. He crawled with difficulty to the tent, found the first aid kit, checked the dosimeter. The readings horrified him. Overnight, each of them had received a dose of about 280 rem. This is the threshold of severe radiation sickness.
By about noon, the others regained consciousness. The condition was severe. Temperature had risen to 38.2 degrees. Pulse exceeded 100 beats. Vomiting began. Overcoming weakness, they returned to the village. The first sign of change was a bird. A crow sat on a cabin roof and cawed. The barrier that had protected the village for decades was gone. In the barn, there was nothing. The bodies had disappeared without a trace. Only the thinnest layer of coal powder on the floor, about 100 grams for the entire room. They collected the powder in a hermetic vial. That same day, they broke camp and headed for the river where their boat waited. A week later, they reached Irkutsk, where they immediately went to the hospital. Thanks to emergency treatment, they managed to avoid irreversible consequences of radiation sickness, though blood counts remained abnormal for a long time. Belostyanov, analyzing what happened, reached a conclusion. Transition to another world is possible only at certain points in space and under certain conditions, powerful disturbance of the geomagnetic field. But something else is troubling. It seems the process is initiated by intelligent entities from the other side. For what purpose are they breaking through a tunnel to our world? The village inhabitants' bodies were moved to an unknown location. Part of the matter turned into energy. hence the radiation. The manuscript with hieroglyphs is currently being studied at Tomsk University Laboratory. Decryption is progressing slowly, but initial results point to descriptions of transition techniques. Research continues, and perhaps answers